We are about 1 month away from the 7th annual one-day Bible study, where we will study through the entire book of Acts in one sitting, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Saturday, April 5. We'll study through the entire book of Acts. And maybe some of you are wondering why in the world we would bother studying our way through an entire book of the Bible in one sitting. It's become an important tradition at our church to see a book of the Bible in its totality. And I came across a great illustration from Jonathan Pennington, and he was arguing for the same practice in his book, Reading the Gospels Wisely. He describes driving in his car, introducing his children to his favorite musical, The Sound of Music, by playing them the soundtrack. Now, Pennington himself had seen the musical, but the kids hadn't. They had only heard the songs. And so they had questions about what lines in the songs meant and what was happening in the movie that spurred on these songs. And Pennington would answer their questions to the best of his ability by recalling where these songs were placed in the story. Sometime later, he had the opportunity to introduce his children to the musical, Sound of Music. And he found that in most cases, his memory had served him well. He had accurately told them what these references in the songs were to, at what point of the story the songs were placed. But in a few situations, he realized that he was completely wrong. He had misremembered how certain things fell, and it changed the way that a song was meant to be understood, or maybe a line in the song was meant to be understood. Maybe more likely, each song appropriately placed in its place in the narrative kind of rose to a greater level of understanding or to a greater fullness, because he could really understand what a character was feeling as they were singing a certain song or another, or really understand the stakes of a situation for one song or another. And I think reading a book of the Bible in its entirety helps us to do exactly that. It helps us to place each situation in its appropriate context so that our understanding can be heightened. Now, that doesn't mean we can only read books of the Bible in its entirety, but it is helpful once in a while to kind of reframe our thinking so that our favorite memory verses or our favorite stories that we recall from these different books of the Bible can kind of have this renewed sense of importance because we've placed it in the right place in the story. For those of you who are familiar with many of the stories or all of the stories in Acts, this will be a good practice for you. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the stories in Acts, maybe you're not familiar with the Bible at all, maybe you've heard a couple sermons from Acts, but you don't really know all that much about what it is. You're like the kids riding in the car listening to the soundtrack. You have an opportunity to see the whole film, to get the whole story of Acts in one sitting and start to piece together some important themes and some important teachings that the rest of the New Testament and really all of Scripture brings out. Acts is a great book of the Bible to have for a one-day Bible study because it introduces us to so many important people and places in the New Testament. It starts off with Jesus and the disciples. We get introduced to the Apostle Paul, who writes a huge section of our New Testament. We get introduced to Mark, who wrote a gospel, the Gospel of Mark. We get introduced to Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and also Acts. We get introduced to Ephesus and Corinth and Thyatira and Rome, these places that the New Testament engages with in several places, Thessalonica, another one. So this will really benefit not only your understanding of the book of Acts, but really the New Testament story. If you're interested in signing up and you haven't done it already, first crcoostburg.org/studyacts. Sign up there or get a hold of us at church. You can find our information online, and we'd love to see you there.